modern history that most everyone knows, they actually started back in the 1970s, but really what got them started was when the computer was invented, and that was shortly after World War II because the Allies used it to defeat the Axis. From 1950 to 1970, there wasn't a whole lot of development because computers were really being used for more like research and NASA and universities and more for educational purposes. But then in the 1970s, they started to use it for entertainment. They found ways to make digital images move on screens and make it respond to buttons that you were able to push. Through the 70s, they didn't really do a whole lot. It was just kind of really basic things. And then in the 1980s, companies started to pour a lot more money into it. They got into like shooting games and eventually into games where you could go on like adventures and story modes and quests and a lot more detailed games. The first game console actually came out in 1967. Not a lot of people know about it. It was a really basic game console. It only had one controller. It was a gun. But what really set the stage was in 1972 when Atari released the very first racing. It was racing it was like focused on racing games. They had like 3 or 4 different racing games on it. People really liked this. People bought it and they put it in their homes. But it was really for the wealthy because it was a lot more expensive and companies didn't really make it affordable to like normal people in the middle class. Then 1980s is when things really started to boom. They had first-person shooter games, and then in the late 1980s when Pac-Man released, it almost doubled the market of the video game industry. It went from 2.8 billion to 4.9 billion, and that's when people or companies really started to realize that there was a huge market in video games as far as in home and just on mobile devices and whatnot. This is when the arcade era really took off. A bunch of companies would invest in all these different gaming consoles, and they put it in just whatever buildings they had, and people would come and they'd pay tokens to play the games. 1990s is when video games started to move into the home. They became a lot more affordable. This is when Nintendo released their Nintendo 64 and PlayStation came out with the first PlayStation. These were the first ever 3D consoles with 3D graphics where you can move kind of forward and back on the screen rather than just left and right. And then in 2000, PlayStation changed the game again, releasing the PS2. It was intended to be an entire home entertainment system, being able to play CDs, DVDs, video games, and even get onto the internet through an Ethernet cord. This is a quote from Joel Bellman, professor at Yale. For the gaming industry, it's become apparent that a major technological leap has taken place, perhaps more so than any previous console war. The most obvious technological improvement has been made with the PlayStation 2 release in 2000. The latest generation games have also brought with them enormous advances in CPU processing to power standardized broadband online functionality and newer motion-sensitive control input devices. Since 2000, the gaming industry has evolved more than they say it ever did before in the past 40 years. The Xbox came out in 2001. Microsoft, it was their first ever console. It didn't really compete with the PlayStation a whole lot because it was a lot more bulky and it didn't run smoothly and it didn't have a big processor. Then eventually when the final generation, the generation that we're on now, came out in 2013, the Xbox One, the PlayStation 3, these have been some of the most powerful gaming consoles ever made. They're intended to pretty much be your entire home entertainment system. They really want to focus on just having one console in the home. Games such as Halo and games that are specific to the GameCube, they were really big to the evolution of video games just because people were really caught onto it. It was eye-catching, it was a new thing, people enjoyed it, it was entertainment. Mobile games, they're not as big of a market, but it's a lot more convenient. Companies still want to invest money in it, simply just because there's a market for it. Everybody has phones, 10-year-olds have phones. For the future of video games, it looks like it's going to be a lot of interactive stuff, a lot of like holograms, like things that go over your face that make it like you're actually in the video game. As far as the future of video games, I don't really know what it holds, but I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, like where like video games can be in the next 10 years, considering where we were at 10 years ago.